Hey everybody, it's CVH here with Between the Lanes. So as of right now, I've done 3 card analysis videos in my card analysis series on this channel. We did Manacora first, then Histgrove, and most recently we did Burn and Pillage, which you can see on screen. And well guys, it's happened again. So right after the Manacora nerf, a couple weeks later if I remember correctly, Manacora was actually nerfed from the card that I actually did the analysis on to a card that was very similar, except it could only destroy creatures in the same lane. Histgrove, while it's been discussed that it might be nerfed sometime in the future, a lot of people have been, at least discussing the possibility of it. Hasn't happened yet, but Burn and Pillage also found itself on the chopping block with today's patch that's being released, the December 14th, 2016 patch. So first off, this is one of just a number of changes in the game. A lot of pretty substantial things are changing, such as support, the number of supports you can have in play being limited slightly, more than it was previously, and the Elixir of Magicka changing completely into a Ring of Magicka. Basically, a good amount of things, including free legendaries that you can get by getting pack bundles, and that they'll add to your account if you've already purchased pack bundles in the past. So I'll link the entire patch notes in the description of this video. I strongly encourage you to check it out, but today we're going to be talking about Burn and Pillage specifically, since, about a week ago, if that even, I did a whole big video talking about, all of the different aspects of this card, and I feel it's only right to discuss what my thoughts are on the nerf, since that was one of the major talking points of that video, is whether or not I thought it was overpowered. I came to the conclusion that it could be nerfed, but they nerfed it in a way that I didn't really anticipate, and I think it's a pretty good nerf, so we'll be going into that right now. So Burn and Pillage, the card you see right now to the left of the screen, no longer exists in the game, and it's been replaced by a much better quality image of what you see on the right now. This was the best image I could get on short notice, since the game is currently updating while I'm recording this, and I don't think there's a better screenshot currently available. But if you can actually read that. It is a 5 Magicka card instead of a 6 Magicka card that deals 1 damage to all enemy creatures in a lane for each destroyed enemy rune. So, pretty simple nerf, reduced in cost, but can only target 1 lane. Like Manacora, like the nerf for Manacora, this keeps the core of the card intact. Manacora basically is the exact same card except strictly limited. This card differs, however, in that it's not strictly worse than it was before. The effect is strictly worse since it only targets 1 lane, and previously it could target both lanes, but its Magicka cost is reduced, and as I'll talk about, that is actually a pretty significant change for the card that this is. I do like the way they nerfed this. I was anticipating just a raised Magicka cost, maybe 7 or 8 or something, and I think a lot of people were thinking about that too, but this is a pretty elegant nerf for a good amount of reasons. The thing I also like is the respect they have for the lane mechanic. Obviously, with Manacora, the card was a bit too powerful because it could just target any lane. It's similar to Blood Dragon kind of in that way. Very different card, but similar in that way where basically any effect that can bypass the 2-lane system of Legends is very powerful, because the 2-lane system keeps a lot of things in check. You play a 2-2 Windkeep Spellsword in one lane, and your opponent only has a 3-2, and they don't have to contest it. They don't have to just throw their 2-drop out there to get eaten. And it helps a lot of things out. So, like, limiting a card of a power level like Manacora to only be able to target 1 lane, you can still basically target whatever you want in either lane, you just have to play it in the same lane, and that limits your options somewhat. Burn and Pillage, much the same vein. So, basically, this card, I mean, a lot of discussion about it right now. People can't really decide whether it's still good, or some people think it might actually be bad. I think this card, like Manacora, will wind up being 100% playable. I called it the best strength card in the game beforehand. I don't think this nerf is enough to really make it unplayable. Whether or not it's the best strength card remains to be seen. I do think at the very least it's probably the best red action still. I think we can safely say that. So Bethesda Direwolf, please don't nerf it more. Don't make me retract that statement as well. But the core of the card is intact. So what this card's... I actually talked about it on the stream. Like, this card is buffed in certain ways. Like, the Magicka reduction, it's not just to make up for the fact that its effect is terrible now, which is kind of what happened to Nakree and Dragon Priest when it was nerfed. It did reduce its cost to a 9, just sort of to make up for the fact that its effect was pretty terrible. As far as I could see, that was majorly the reason that the cost was reduced. However, Burn and Pillage as a 5-drop instead of a 6-drop is significant for the decks that actually play Burn and Pillage, which are, like I discussed in the past video, mostly aggro decks, and some faster mid-range decks like mid-range archer. You got aggro battle mage, aggro crusader. Those are decks that you typically find this card in as the 2 or 3 of. So in those matchups, and I discussed that it was best in the mirror matches. In those mirror matches, the fact that this comes down on turn 5 instead of 6 is pretty huge. I can definitely remember countless times when I was playing this card in a variety of decks where I had it in my hand, or I just had 5 Magicka, and I didn't have the Elixir, and I was like, well, if I could play Burn and Pillage this turn, I could probably win this game. And it just wasn't able to be played. And if it was, the entire game would have turned around, because in a fast matchup like that, in a mirror match specifically, when both players are trying to end the game, well before turn 10 if they have their say about things, that's a significant portion of time. If you're going to a control mirror match where a game's going to go 15, 20 plus turns, the difference between playing a card one turn before a different card, sometimes it matters in the very early turns, but later in the game, not quite as much. When you're really trying to close the game out in an aggressive versus aggressive matchup, that's like a sixth of the game that's passing between turn 5 and turn 6 if you're really using Burn and Pillage to close and put the finishing touches on your opponent. So that is pretty much the reality now, is that is very possible. So in those aggressive versus aggressive matchups, I would kind of make the case that the card is being slightly buffed, because in a lot of those, you're committing to one lane. You're committing to one lane, and your opponent's committing to the other lane, and it kind of turns into a race situation. Against control decks, it is significant that it comes down a turn earlier, and basically it's nerfed in certain parts of the game and buffed in other parts of the game. I think a lot of the time in control, your opponent's not going to have that many things out in the first place, which, as I talked about in the previous video, is a lot of the reason Burn and Pillage isn't going to be quite as effective. When it was effective, sometimes you could just rely on top-decking it late in the game after your opponent's guarded up each lane. You didn't have anything on board, but you were like, well, if I draw my Burn and Pillage, I've already broken 4 to 5 runes, and I can just sort of cheese my opponent's entire board out, clear everything, and turn it back into a top-deck war, just hope I top-deck some damage that sticks. Now this card is significantly worse at doing that. It can't just cheese your opponent out. And like I said in the previous video, it still wasn't fantastic against control decks. But yeah, now that the card is limited somewhat, if your opponent is able to guard both lanes relatively early before it turns 5, they play a Hive Defender in one lane, then a Hive Defender in another lane, Burn and Pillage significantly reduced in power level, and that I think is very important when your opponent's trying to come back on the board. So I mentioned that it was probably, slightly better in some cases in the aggro versus aggro mirrors, but the important thing to remember with this nerf, and what I really like about the nerf, why I like it more than just a sort of a kind of an archaic increase in mana Magicka cost, that seems sort of like, I don't know, sort of like a caveman way to go about things. This is a much more elegant nerf is what I'm trying to say, and the reason I think that is because it does allow for counterplay. So what I mean by that is basically your opponent has some say in how bad Burn and Pillage is against them. Now I'm not trying to say it's always able to be played around, because it's not, but it's a lot better than it was before, which is basically you can't play around this card. I mean, you could make the argument, the case that, well, you can play around Burn and Pillage by not letting your opponent break your runes, but that's kind of the plan against aggro anyway. I don't know anyone who was, overly happy that 4 or 5 runes had been broken to that point in the game. Now you actually can play your hand if your opponent has accomplished their game plan of breaking your runes, which is pretty likely. You actually have a way to play around it and have a decision when you play your creatures how bad Burn and Pillage is for you, a lot of the time. Sometimes, especially in those aggro versus aggro mirror matches, you're not really going to have an option. You're going to have to play into Burn and Pillage a lot of the time. Your opponent's racing in one lane, you can't take that lane back. You just have to set up lethal in the shadow lane and hope your opponent doesn't Burn and Pillage you on 5. Burn and Pillage is still probably going to get the job done in those cases, since a lot of those times, leaving one creature in the other lane isn't going to be that big of a deal. It isn't now, and, the fact that, Burn and Pillage only targets one lane now, in a lot of situations it's going to get the job done. But there are definitely times now where you, as a control deck player, or an aggro player in the mirror matches, you can maybe say, alright, I have 2 creatures in this uncontested lane, my opponent has 1 creature in the field lane, maybe I do play these 2 creatures this turn in the field lane. Sure, he can trade with one of them, but if he Burn and Pillages, it can only target 1 lane, and I won't be giving up my entire initiative. So it's situations like that I think this nerf is a lot better for players. And it also gives you skill, well, it allows for a little bit of more skill in planning your turns out as the person who's casting Burn and Pillage. You can't just say, I'm going to break all your runes and kill stuff. Now, you're still breaking runes and killing stuff, but you can think about, well, can I make any plays that'll either force my opponent into my lane to contest, or force my opponent into the other lane? And what happens if they Burn and Pillage me? Can I make the Burn and Pillage that I have more effective than theirs? And that's something to think about that we didn't really have to think about before, because it was all just breaking runes. Can I make my Burn and Pillage more effective? Well, let's count my damage and see how much I can put to my opponent's face. And now there's a little bit more layers of strategy. So I do like that. That's basically how I feel about the nerf. I think it's still a very powerful card. I fully intend to keep running it in aggro, and I fully intend to test it pretty substantially in, any deck that would run it now. I don't think it's strictly unplayable in any of them. So if you're watching this video and you haven't seen the nerf before, no, I don't recommend Disenchanting Bird and Pillage. I would definitely give it a shot. And what do you think about the nerf? So, I've offered my opinions, and hopefully the entire card analysis of Burn and Pillage the way it was in this video, given my sort of thoughts on the matter. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the nerf, whether it's a good nerf, whether it's bad, whether it's worse, maybe even better in some situations. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to check out the description. Like I said, I will have a link to all of the patch notes. Like I said, there's a lot of cool things coming out with this, not even having to do with the Chaos Arena, the Madhouse Collection, and the Mad Prince pack. You should go check them out and see how the game has changed somewhat. And I will see you guys next time.